I used to think my life was pretty close to perfect. My husband, Ryan, and I were incredibly happy, or so I thought. We had a beautiful daughter, Princess Bella, who was the light of our lives. Yes, we actually named her Princess, her father's idea, naturally. He claimed it was a family tradition, though I was never sure which fairy tale he was living in. Still, despite the occasional raised eyebrows, Princess Bella seemed to fit our daughter perfectly. She was the happiest little girl in the world, always dancing around the house in her tiaras and tutus. On the surface, we had it all: a cozy apartment, a decent car, and a simple but content life. I loved Ryan, and I believed he loved me and Bella just as much. He worked as an insurance salesman. It wasn't a glamorous job, but he was decent at it. Or so he said. Sometimes I had my doubts. It wasn't unusual for him to come home looking a little more stressed than usual, but I chalked it up to the pressures of work. Who didn't have bad days? In hindsight, I should have known that something was wrong. One chilly afternoon, I was in the kitchen making Bella's favorite peanut butter and jelly sandwich when I heard a heavy knock on the door. It was an odd time for visitors. Ryan wasn't home yet, and we weren't expecting anyone. I brushed off the crumbs on my hands and headed to the door, assuming it was just a delivery or maybe one of the neighbors. But as soon as I opened the door, my heart sank. There stood a hulking, bald man wearing a leather jacket. He looked like he had stepped right out of a mob movie, intimidating and clearly not the kind of person you wanted to invite in for tea. His face was stern, his expression unreadable, and his eyes scanned the apartment as though he already knew what was inside. "Mrs. Davis?" he asked, his voice deep and gravelly. I nodded, suddenly feeling very small in comparison to this giant of a man. "Where's your husband?" he demanded, glancing past me as though Ryan might pop out from behind the couch at any second. "Ryan's not home right now," I replied, trying to sound calm, but my voice wavered. The man didn't seem to care. He sighed heavily and shook his head. "That idiot," he muttered under his breath. "Your husband owes the cartel. He lost big." "Excuse me." I felt like I had misheard him. "Cartel. Lost. He gambled away your apartment, your car, and all your savings. Everything." The man's words hit me like a freight train. My brain struggled to process what he was saying. Cartel. My husband had been gambling with a cartel. And if he doesn't pay up— The man paused, letting his words linger, as if I wasn't already terrified enough. "Let's just say it won't be pretty." I stood frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the doorframe, trying to make sense of the madness that was unfolding in front of me. Ryan, my Ryan, had gambled away everything? The apartment, the car, even our bills were gone. How? How much does he owe? I asked, my voice trembling. The man gave me a sharp look. "A lot." He didn't need to give me a specific number. The tone of his voice made it clear that the sum was far beyond anything we could ever pay back. Before I could ask more questions, the man turned and walked away without so much as a backward glance. His heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, leaving me standing there, reeling from the shock. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, sliding to the floor. My mind raced, my thoughts spiraling out of control. What was I supposed to do now? How could Ryan do this to us? And why hadn't he told me about any of this? That evening, I waited for Ryan to come home, hoping for an explanation, but as the hours ticked by, it became clear that he wasn't coming. Days passed, and still no sign of him. Ryan had vanished without a trace, leaving me to clean up the mess he had made. It took some time for the full weight of Ryan's betrayal to sink in. I spent the first few days and a days trying to figure out how I could have been so blind. How could I not have seen the signs? The secretive phone calls, the nights he came home late without explanation, the sudden tightness of our budget. None of it had made sense at the time, but now it all fit together like a twisted puzzle. Princess Bella, bless her heart, was too young to understand what was going on. She continued to play with her dolls and twirl around the apartment as though nothing had changed. but I knew that our world had been turned upside down. My parents, as they always did, came to my rescue. When I finally told them the whole story, how Ryan had gambled away everything we had, they didn't ask questions or cast blame. They just helped. They loaned me money to settle some of the debts, helped me move out of the apartment before the cartel came back for what was left, and even took Bella in for a few weeks while I tried to get back on my feet. It wasn't easy. I had to start from scratch, find a new place to live, figure out how to make ends meet, and navigate life as a single mom. But I did it. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt my life, piece by piece. A year later, life had started to stabilize. Bella was in preschool, and I had managed to land a decent job working as a marketing assistant for a local real estate firm. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to cover the bills and put food on the table. And most importantly, it gave me a sense of normalcy again. That's when I met Jack. Jack was a broker at the firm, a sharp, well-dressed guy who had a reputation for closing deals like nobody's business. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room and command attention without even trying. Naturally, I assumed he was one of those overly confident, cocky types. But as I got to know him, I realized there was more to Jack than just charm and good looks. One day, after a particularly stressful meeting, Jack and I ended up having lunch together at a cafe down the street. I wasn't expecting much, just some small talk about work. But our conversation took an unexpected turn. "So, how did you end up working here?" Jack asked between bites of his sandwich. I hesitated, unsure of how much to share. I wasn't exactly proud of the whole "my husband lost everything to a cartel" situation. "It's a long story," I said, giving him a half smile. "I've got time," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "Besides, I like long stories." And so, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I told him everything. I told him about Ryan, about the apartment, about the cartel, and about how I had been forced to start over. Jack listened intently, never interrupting or giving me that look of pity I had grown so used to from other people. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "You've been through a lot," he said, his voice sincere. "But look at you, you're still standing. That takes strength." I blushed, not used to receiving compliments like that. "Thanks. But honestly, I didn't have much of a choice. I had to keep going for Bella." Jack smiled, and for the first time, I noticed how warm and genuine his expression was. "You know," he said, "people say that everything happens for a reason. I don't always believe that, but in your case, maybe you're meant for something better." His words stuck with me long after that lunch, and as the weeks went by, Jack and I grew closer. He was funny, kind, and most importantly, he made me feel safe, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't long before Jack and I officially became a couple. He didn't mind that I came with baggage. He loved Bella as if she were his own daughter, and she adored him right back. In fact, the two of them were inseparable. Jack even started calling her his little princess, which Bella found hilarious. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch, Jack turned to me with a mischievous grin. "I have a surprise for you," he said. "Oh, what kind of surprise?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Let's just say it's something life-changing." I blinked, confused. Before I could ask what he meant, Jack pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped box and handed it to me. I carefully unwrapped the box, my heart racing. Inside was a tiny pair of baby booties. "Jack!" I started, tears welling up in my eyes. "I know," he said softly. "We're having a son." Finding out I was pregnant was both thrilling and terrifying. I had rebuilt my life from the ashes of what Ryan had left behind, and now I was about to start a new chapter with Jack. But this time, things were different. I had learned from my past. I wasn't the same person who had been blindsided by betrayal. As my pregnancy progressed, life continued to fall into place. Jack and I bought a small house together. Not too fancy, but perfect for our growing family. We painted the nursery together, argued over baby names, and laughed as Bella demanded we name her baby brother Captain Sparkles. We didn't. Through it all, Jack was my rock. He was patient, kind, and always knew how to make me laugh. Even when I was feeling overwhelmed, he made me believe in love again, real love, the kind that doesn't crumble at the first sign of trouble. And then, just when I thought life couldn't get any better, I received an unexpected message. One evening, as I was scrolling through my emails, a message popped up from an unknown sender. The subject line simply read, "Ryan." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from Ryan in over 2 years. I thought he had vanished for good. Against my better judgment, I clicked on the email. It was short and cryptic. "I know I messed up, but I'm coming back." As I sat there staring at the email, I felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath my feet. Ryan, coming back. What did he mean? Why now? For 2 years, he'd been a ghost. No word, no explanation, just gone, leaving Bella and me to pick up the pieces of the life he shattered. Jack, noticing my pale face, leaned over. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. How do you explain to your loving, supportive boyfriend that the man who destroyed your life might be walking back into it? I handed Jack the phone, letting him read the email. "Ryan." Jack's brow furrowed. "He's alive. Apparently," I muttered, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions hitting me. Anger, confusion, fear. I didn't know what Ryan wanted or why he was coming back now, but I knew one thing. I didn't want him anywhere near Bella or my new life. "Maybe it's just an empty threat," Jack suggested, trying to stay calm. "He probably realized what a mess he left behind, and now feels guilty." But something about the email felt off. It wasn't just guilt. It was a declaration, a warning that he intended to return, and knowing Ryan, he was never one to leave quietly. Over the next few days, I tried to push the email out of my mind. Jack was supportive, always ready with a joke to lighten the mood or a hug when the anxiety crept in. Bella, blissfully unaware, continued to live in her world of princesses and imaginary kingdoms. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan's return wasn't just a bad memory coming back to haunt me. It was the start of something bigger. The next message came a week later. This time it wasn't an email. It was a handwritten letter. In my mailbox. I pulled it out one morning while walking Bella to school. The envelope had no return address. But the moment I saw the handwriting, my stomach twisted in knots. Ryan's distinct scrawl stared back at me. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I stuffed it in my bag and tried to keep my composure in front of Bella. No need to alarm her. After I dropped Bella off, I sat in my car, parked at the school, and tore open the envelope. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. "Amelia, I'm sorry for disappearing. I didn't have a choice. But things are different now. I want to see Bella. She deserves to know her father. And I'm coming back to make things right. Don't try to stop me. Ryan." I crumpled the letter in my hands, my heart racing. How dare he? How dare he think he could just waltz back into our lives after everything he'd done? After he'd gambled away our entire life and left without a word. Part of me wanted to tear the letter to shreds and pretend it never existed. But another part of me was scared. Ryan sounded different, more determined, maybe even desperate. And that scared me more than anything. I called Jack, who arrived in 10 minutes flat, his face serious. "You're not alone in this," he reassured me. "We'll figure it out." As much as Jack tried to reassure me, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. And sure enough, the trouble started shortly after the second letter. It was a typical Friday afternoon. I was at home, trying to organize Bella's room, while Jack was out running errands. Bella was at school, and the house was quiet, too quiet. That's when I heard it, the knock. At first, it sounded like a regular knock, but the longer it went on, the more insistent it became. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It wasn't the friendly knock of a neighbor. It was more like someone demanding to be let in. I crept to the front door, peeking through the peephole, and there he was, Ryan, the same Ryan who had disappeared 2 years ago, who had left us with nothing. He stood there, looking disheveled and gaunt, like life hadn't been kind to him. His eyes darted around nervously, his face a shadow of the man I once knew. For a brief moment, I considered not answering the door, pretending I wasn't home. But knowing Ryan, that would only delay the inevitable. So, with a deep breath, I opened the door. "Ryan," I said, my voice flat. "Amelia," he said, his voice hoarse. "I need to talk to you." I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me. There was no way I was letting him inside my house. Not after what he'd done. Not after the pain he'd caused. "What are you doing here, Ryan?" I asked, folding my arms defensively. "I thought you were gone for good." He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the side like he was checking to make sure no one was watching. "I didn't want to leave Amelia. I didn't have a choice." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" I snapped, the anger bubbling to the surface. "You disappeared without a word. You left me and Bella with nothing. And now you just show up, expecting me to what? Welcome you back with open arms." "I know I messed up," Ryan admitted, his voice breaking. "But I was in deep. Deeper than you know. The cartel, they were after me. I had to run." The cartel again. Of course." I sighed, shaking my head. "What do you want, Ryan? Why are you here now?" "I want to see Bella," he said, his eyes pleading. "I want to be her father again." I felt the weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. He wanted to be a father again? After everything? After abandoning us? "That's not going to happen," I said firmly. "You lost that right when you walked away." Ryan stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Please, Amelia. I've changed. I'm clean now. I don't gamble anymore. I got a job, a real job. I just want a chance to make things right." I didn't know what to believe. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, but another part of me, one that I didn't want to admit, felt conflicted. Bella deserved to know the truth, but was Ryan really the father she needed? As if things couldn't get more complicated. Later that evening, just as I was telling Jack about Ryan's sudden appearance, there was another knock on the door. Jack opened it, and standing there was a man in his early 40s, wearing a rumpled suit and holding a badge. His name was Detective Walker, and he wasn't there for small talk. "Sorry to disturb you folks, but I need to ask you some questions about Ryan Davis," the detective said, stepping inside with an air of authority. Jack and I exchanged confused glances. "What's this about?" Jack asked. Walker sighed, flipping open a small notebook. "Ryan's been involved in some shady business with the cartel. We've been tracking him for months. We believe he's gotten himself into some serious trouble, and he may be dragging others into it with him." I felt my stomach drop. Dragging others into what? The detective's face grew grim. "There's reason to believe Ryan's been using people, especially family members, to cover his tracks, financially and in other ways." My heart raced. What does that mean for Bella? Is she in danger? "We don't have any solid proof yet, but we've heard whispers that the cartel is still after Ryan. They know he's back in town. If I were you, I'd be careful. He might not have come back just to see his daughter." Jack stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "Is there anything we can do?" "For now, just stay away from Ryan, and keep an eye on your daughter. We'll be in touch if we hear anything else." With that, Detective Walker handed us his card and left, leaving behind a thick cloud of unease.